On the misty Red River, where our family had made a living by net fishing for generations, there was one thing the adults always avoided mentioning. That morning, my father saw something pitch black repeatedly surface and dive, thrashing in the water as if struggling between the realms of life and death. He thought it was nothing significant, but to his surprise, when he threw stones at it, it vanished. Mrs. Xuan Thai, whose boat was nearby, clearly heard the sound of a ghost throwing stones just before dawn. A few days later, the moonlight revealed the silhouette of a buffalo with two unusually long horns, submerged deep within the river, like a wandering spirit adrift after a flood. An elder, over 70, recounted tales of animals also becoming ghosts, and the villagers began to believe they were living beside the unreleased spirit of a water buffalo. But that was just the beginning. For later that night, my mother's net snagged the body of a woman. The ghost of the dead woman stood silently on the bank, looking down, whispering a spine-chilling sentence. No need to retrieve the body, just burn incense. From then on, our family was both blessed and faced with many strange occurrences around the riverbank. The boundary between the living and the dead was so fragile that a mere gust of wind or the splash of water was enough to send shivers down the spine of the entire riverside community. I was born in the north, where the Red River flows long and wide. For generations, my family had worked the river, setting nets, traps, and fish fences to make a living. The only possession of the people here was their boat, which served as their home for eating, sleeping, and daily life. Bathing and personal hygiene all took place right on the river itself. Early in the dim morning, before my mother and I were even awake, my father would already be brewing tea. As he drowsily puffed on his pipe, he suddenly saw something in the distance repeatedly splashing the water. "It's so chilly," he thought. "Who would be bathing in the river this early?" My father stood up to get a closer look. He saw it surfacing and then submerging, diving very deep and staying down for a long time. It would only reappear after about a minute. Knowing it wasn't a person, he quietly went to the bank, picked up a few medium-sized stones, and returned to the boat. He threw them forcefully at the spot where the thing was bobbing up and down. A loud splash echoed. The creature thrashed violently in the water, then submerged completely, never to resurface. In the morning, Mrs. Sang told my mother a story that made my father laugh all day. "Oh my, do you know what happened, dear?" she exclaimed. "There's a ghost near where I anchor my boat by that big guava tree." My mother, curious, asked, "What happened? Did you see it, Mrs. Sang?" Mrs. Sang truthfully recounted. "Yes, just before dawn I was sleeping when I heard sounds like stones or dirt being thrown into the water. Several times. Who would be throwing stones that early in the morning?" My husband ran out to look, but there was no one there. "You see, ghosts are running rampant now." Mrs. Sang saw my father laughing, thinking he didn't believe her, so she told Dan, "You just keep laughing there. One day it'll come back and drag you away." That evening during dinner, my father brought up the story again and confessed to my mother that he was the one who had thrown the stones that morning. My mother scolded him for a moment, but then couldn't help but burst into laughter. Still, our family wondered what that thing that kept surfacing and diving really was. The next misty morning, my father once again sat sipping his tea and smoking his pipe. Today, our family and Mrs. Sang's family were sharing a meal, so our boats were anchored only about 10 meters apart. This time, my father saw the thing diving and surfacing again. He didn't throw stones into the water anymore, but slowly and carefully moved to the stern of the boat to see what strange creature it was. The moonlight was still bright, illuminating everything, and combined with the oil lamp shining from Mrs. Sang's boat, my father clearly saw it was a buffalo. Specifically, it was a buffalo with two very long horns, continuously surfacing and then submerging underwater a moment later. While buffaloes can dive, they can't stay submerged for so long and disappear without a trace like that. My father found it very strange. In the morning, as he pulled in his nets, he recounted the story to some nearby boats. An old man, over 70 but still strong, who was fishing with his son, said he had lived long enough to know many things. "It's not just humans who become ghosts when they die. Animals can also become spirits and return," he declared. "Does anyone remember the big flood a few months ago?" Some people nodded, seemingly understanding. Indeed, a few months prior, a storm had struck. People saw carcasses of buffaloes, cows, dogs, and cats floating on the river but did nothing, letting them drift wherever they would. Hearing this, Mrs. Sang gasped in alarm. "Oh my God, I told you I wasn't wrong. I can't believe my boat is anchored near that buffalo ghost." Others chimed in. "Lucky it didn't pierce your boat and sink you both, huh?" Mrs. Sang shook her head, looked at her husband, and said, "Let's anchor somewhere else tonight. Anchor right next to Dan's boat so it's less scary." Everyone burst out laughing at that, but beneath the laughter, some faces grew pensive. They made their living on the river, and they would even retrieve the bodies of drowned people, but they had never actually encountered a vengeful spirit returning. Yet now, a buffalo ghost had appeared. Though it hadn't caused any harm, it certainly unsettled everyone's minds. Sitting there, casually untangling fish from his net, the old man, over 70, began to tell another story. Back in the day, near my daughter's house, there was a pig slaughterhouse. Every night, they'd slaughter over a dozen pigs to sell the next morning. Eventually, that family went bankrupt. Their children became addicted to drugs and died. The parents had to close the slaughterhouse, selling both their land and house to another couple. That was the karma of the butcher, I suppose. But the new couple who bought the house were constantly tormented. Their belongings would move around, sometimes even disappear. The wife recounted that at night, when she went to relieve herself, she would see a wounded pig, blood gushing all over the back of the house, running wildly. So this family invited a shaman. The shaman said the pig had become a spirit, growing 4 tusks, and was sitting brazenly on the couple's bed. Fortunately, the shaman was powerful and managed to subdue it. From then on, the couple returned to a normal life, but sometimes they still saw it appear, even though it had been exorcised. The pig spirit even reenacted its own slaughtering process, a truly terrifying sight, they said. The old man's story made me shudder. Everyone felt a sense of dread, just looking at each other and sighing. We hoped that things wouldn't become too terrible, so that people like us, who had no land to call our own, could find refuge on this river. The old man's pig story made me refuse to eat pork for several weeks, sticking to fish or other foods. My mother chided me, "You're such a coward, son. Pork isn't easy to come by and you're being picky." But I held firm until one day, my father bought me a steamed bun from the village market. Those steamed buns were famously delicious, and I had never had one before. Because they were more expensive than fried cakes or sticky rice cakes, my mother never bought them for me. Today, Dad bought one and said it was filled with green bean paste, so I ate it. It was incredibly delicious. The filling was beyond wonderful, even better than the ban chung and ban tet asterisk we had at Tet. "Wow, Dad, you're so rich now, buying steamed buns for us for breakfast," I said as I ate. My father pulled another one from his basket, saying, "I have one more, you can eat it later." I smiled happily. As I bit into the filling, I found the taste very strange, not at all like the green bean paste Dad had mentioned. It tasted like the filling of the bitter melon jam I'd eaten when visiting my sick grandpa in Saigon. "Dad, is the bun filling made of meat?" My father, seeing me finish the bun, nodded with a sly grin. "See, you're not scared of pork anymore." I heard that and pouted. "Why did you trick me, Dad?" My father ruffled my hair and told me to go play, then come back and eat more later. The bun was so good that I didn't wait and ate it right away. My parents laughed loudly watching me, while I savored every bite. From then on, I stopped being afraid of pork and ate it as usual. My father watched me eat heartily and said, "See, all your mother's hard work pulling nets last night wasn't in vain, was it?" I didn't understand and asked, "What do you mean, Dad?" My mother tried to stop him, but Dad said I was old enough to understand and that he should tell me so I'd know what to avoid. It turned out, Dad recounted, "Last night, my parents were setting nets in the deep part of the river, so as night approached, they moored the boat closer to the bank to sell their catch in the morning. As soon as the boat docked, my mother took her net down, intending to cast it nearby to catch a few more fish. But as she pulled her net, it snagged something very heavy. She couldn't pull it in. She strained with all her might and saw a woman in a white dress standing on the bank. My mother was about to call her to help pull, as my father was still busy with the other nets on the boat. But when my mother looked back at the net, alas, a human body was entangled, preventing her from pulling it. My mother looked up at the bank and realized it was the spirit of that very woman. The woman had a pale face and dark circles under her eyes, but she did nothing to my mother. My mother wasn't a timid person, having been hardened since childhood, so she was only slightly afraid because her net had hooked a human body. She looked around, but no other boats were docked there, so she had no choice but to call my father. My mother said she called out very loudly, several times, but my father didn't respond. Knowing it was the woman's doing, my mother clasped her hands and prayed, "My lady, I am poor and only seeking food, and I have offended your body. I beg for your compassion and forgiveness so I can continue my work. Tomorrow I need to pay for my child's school fees." My mother said she saw the woman vanish into the body, and the body itself untangled from the net and drifted away with the current. Only then did my mother call my father, who immediately jumped down. When my mother recounted it, my father said, "That's good." So my parents decided to cast their nets again and caught a lot of fish. As for the body, my mother said it drifted freely and then got caught by another boat. They retrieved the body and brought it to the commune for burial. My mother didn't retrieve her body because she knew the woman would seek help from someone more able. When the body detached itself from the net and drifted away, my mother heard the woman's soft voice. "No need to retrieve the body, just burn incense." So, this morning, my mother went to the market, bought some offerings, and burned incense at the new grave in the commune. I, too, got my school fees paid and went to school like all my friends. From then on, my mother would always go to light incense, offer fruits, or prepare a meal for the woman. At night, in her sleep, the woman would even guide my mother to good fishing spots, generally helping her a great deal. About a few years later, my family moved to the south to live. That year, a great storm had swept away everything my family owned. Fortunately, we still had our lives and some savings, which we had entrusted to my maternal grandparents, so we still had a little capital. Back then, my paternal grandparents and my aunt and uncle had also saved up some money to buy a small plot of land, planning to build a house on the bank to provide a stable home for their grandchildren. However, my parents' boat was completely destroyed and washed away by the flood, so my paternal grandparents took half the money they intended for their house and gave it to my parents to buy a new boat. But my father, along with some relatives, went to the south to clear forests and cultivate land. He acquired a plot of land for himself there and also worked as a laborer, earning enough money to bring my mother and me to live with him the following year. My parents worked as laborers, then bought a coffee plantation, and began tending their own land while also tapping rubber. Life became quite prosperous. Although it was hard work, the money earned was substantial, so our family remained in the south until now. I remember that year, at the age of 10, I moved to the south and started school. Many of my friends also had parents from the north, so I didn't feel isolated. The place I lived in was diverse, with people from all over, so there were many different accents. I made a few friends, among them a girl named Huong. Her house wasn't far from mine, so we often went to school together. Huong's house was about 200 meters from mine. Every morning, I would pass by and ask her to come along. Everything would have been perfectly normal if our school schedule hadn't changed to the afternoon. Classes started around 1 p.m., so we had to leave early. Sometimes, after finishing lunch, I would be walking with Huong to school even before noon. The school was only about 2 kilometers away, less than half an hour's walk. My mother often said that noon could sometimes be more terrifying than nighttime. She recounted that at the rubber tapping field, some women who worked until noon would stay to eat lunch. One woman and a group of 4 or 5 friends would finish tapping, then sit down for a meal. After eating, everyone would spread out to sleep. The rubber garden was very cool, so they just needed to lay out an old mat, use a hat to cover their faces, and they would sleep soundly. This woman also lay under a tree. She finished eating and fell asleep around 11:45 a.m. As she was drifting off to a peaceful sleep *slap, she clearly felt a huge hand slap her face. She jolted awake, sat up, and looked around to see everyone else still asleep. She tried to calm herself, even though she could still feel the stinging pain on her reddened cheek. She lay down again. This time, before she even fell asleep, she distinctly felt a freezing cold hand grab hers. The hand was icy cold, and it felt like it was pressing down. She slept without her hat covering her face, so when she opened her eyes, she almost fainted because right in front of her was a shadow sitting on her, making it hard to breathe. Her mouth gasped, but she couldn't scream, her limbs struggled, but she couldn't move. Though the shadow wasn't clear, she saw it was a young man. He was pressing down on her, and his hand was tightly gripping hers. Instinctively, she tried to open her mouth and thrash, but her whole body felt frozen. It gripped her hand tightly and sat on her chest for about a minute until she suddenly managed to move her arm. She thrashed it, hitting the rubber tree trunk so hard it drew blood. At this moment, her mouth finally opened wide. She recounted that in a flash, it seemed to evaporate and vanish. Everyone woke up, startled, and ran over to find her lying still, one hand bleeding from hitting the tree trunk, the other bright red as if someone had squeezed it tightly. Hearing her story, everyone was so scared that they dared not sleep anymore. Although my mother's stories were terrifying, I had gotten used to them, and going with Huong made it less frightening. That afternoon, Huong was sick and felt somewhat tired, but because midterm exams were approaching, she still went to school. I tried to be chivalrous, carried Huong's backpack, and we walked to school. The path we took was a dirt road, flanked by coffee and pepper plantations. After the last houses, it became stay-toned land, where rubber trees were planted. About 500 meters further, there was a stream. Usually no one stayed overnight there, so it was just the two of us walking. When we reached a big rock, Huong called out, "Ben, let's sit and rest for a bit." It was about another kilometer to school, so seeing Huong tired, I agreed. Huong sat for a while, then looked up at the dense rubber tree branches and said, "Ben, do you see that big bird up there?" I looked in the direction Huong pointed, but saw nothing. Huong said I must be nearsighted. I kept looking but couldn't see anything, so I just shrugged it off and handed Huong some water. Suddenly, I distinctly heard a voice behind us. "Come here." Huong and I both turned around but saw no one, so we looked at each other. Again, the voice sounded very strange and menacing, like the voices of witches in cartoons. "Come to me?" Huong and I still didn't understand. We quickly turned back again, and oh my ancestors. A pitch-black figure with bright red eyes was clinging to the tree trunk, extending its bony hands and beckoning us closer. We both screamed hysterically, falling backward onto the ground in fright. I'm quite timid, so I just froze, staring at it, but Huong quickly stood up, pulled my hand, and told me to run. Seeing Huong run, I was terrified and ran after her. But what I felt most ashamed of was that I threw away Huong's backpack, which I was carrying on my chest, and just ran. Perhaps in my panic, I had just tossed Huong's bag aside. By the time we reached school, where there were many people, Huong was quite tired. She looked at me and asked about her backpack, and I whimpered, saying I must have left it by the rock. Huong said she'd go back and get it, but after taking a few steps, she collapsed and was taken to the communal health station by a nearby elderly man. I met a neighbor and asked her to take Huong's backpack home for her to ease my guilt. After that day, Huong had a fever for a whole week, perhaps because she was already sick and then encountered something unclean, making her illness last longer. As for me, I made my mother drive me to school by motorbike, and in the afternoons, I would just speed past that section of the road on my way home. I was utterly terrified. Regarding the plot of land my parents bought, everything was fine. The red soil was excellent for planting. There was an untouched piece of land behind the house, which my parents decided to use for growing cassava, but it simply wouldn't sprout. They waited for over a month and nothing came up. My parents worried that something might have gnawed at it since they had used cassava stems given to them to plant. But when they dug it up, the buds were still intact, so my parents decided to wait. Another month passed and still nothing grew, so my parents sowed vegetable seeds there instead, hoping to sell them. The seeds wouldn't germinate, even though they had tilled the soil thoroughly. They tried planting one thing after another, but not a single sprout appeared, while weeds grew rapidly. My mother pondered this, then asked my father, "Honey, do you think there's a ghost?" My father questioned, "A ghost? What do you mean, a ghost?" My mother spoke softly, but I, pretending to sleep, still heard her. "Don't you see? Nothing we plant or sow grows. There must be a skeleton or something unclean buried deep in the ground." My father noticed me stir, so he motioned for my mother to go to bed. I was scared too. That night, I was so frightened that I could only cling tightly to my mother. I didn't even dare to go outside to use the restroom. A few days later, my mother was referred by some friends to visit a shaman. The shaman confirmed that there was a skeleton underground and told my mother to prepare, and he would come to help. My mother returned and told my father, who then asked some relatives to help dig up the spot. As the shaman had said, they found a skeleton. Authorities came to confirm its identity and then took the remains for burial in the commune cemetery, as it wasn't a local person. As for the shaman, he said it was the remains of a soldier. Back then, soldiers who fell in battle were often buried hastily by their comrades, so these remains had been there for a long time. The deceased, though not harming our family, had cleverly let us know of its presence so it could be properly interred. The shaman also said that anything planted there afterward would grow wonderfully. My parents followed his advice, and everything they planted thrived. Many plants that others needed to pre-germinate would sprout simply by being placed in that soil, without even needing to be covered. To this day, That spot is where my mother grows vegetables to sell at the market. Every seed she sows sprouts evenly, the vegetables are lush and green, and even if she forgets to water them, they barely wilt. Perhaps that's their way of repaying my family's kindness, as my mother always visits the grave to offer incense, fruits, and meals on the 1st and 15th days of the lunar month. I suppose they bless us in return. Days turned into months until Huong and I were in middle school, and we both started riding bicycles to school. Since the middle school was about 7 or 8 kilometers from home, both our families bought us bicycles. Back then, Chinese bicycles with built-in flashlights were expensive. Our friends mostly rode old, second-hand bikes. So, even though we lived in a relatively easy area, my parents' income from rubber tapping and coffee pepper harvests meant our lives were more comfortable than before. Towards the end of middle school, classes were in the afternoon, so we would cycle to school not too early. Because we were riding bikes, every time we reached the spot where I had seen that black figure as a child, Huong would pedal faster. I tried my best to keep up. After a few such instances, we would look at each other and breathe a sigh of relief. That night, we had extra classes, so it got dark early. It was only around 6 p.m., but everything was already dark, and being in the rubber garden made it even darker. After our extra class, everyone decided to stay and eat cakes and drink, so we were late getting home. We urged each other to cycle fast to make it home for dinner with our parents. It's safe to say that night was destiny for Huong. As Huong's bike approached that spot, its chain started making a clanking sound. I sensed a problem, so I let Huong go ahead and followed behind her. Suddenly, I heard a crash. Huong's bike fell and Huong herself tumbled to the ground. I quickly ran over to help Huong up and righted her bike. I asked if she was okay, and Huong said she was fine and could cycle home. Seeing Huong get on her bike and ride, I felt relieved and followed behind her. Huong seemed to be pedaling very heavily, each rotation of the wheel requiring all her strength. I saw this and thought Huong was in pain, so I suggested, "How about I take your bike home and we can come back for mine later?" But Huong said she was almost home, so she'd just keep pedaling herself. After a short distance, we were almost at Huong's front gate. Another crash. Huong fell again right in front of her house. Huong's parents ran out with me to help her inside. Seeing that Huong was okay, I excused myself and went home. At home, I told my parents why I was late and about Huong falling twice. My father calmly told Mother Mai to visit the girl, while my mother thought deeply and said Mai would go tomorrow. The next morning, which was Sunday, my mother and I went to visit, simply walking over and bringing Huong some packs of bird's nest drink. Huong's parents warmly welcomed us. "Huong is in her room. Go on in," Huong's mother said, pointing to the room. I asked permission, then knocked on the door. Huong said the door wasn't locked, so I opened it and went in. "Ben, were you okay last night?" I was surprised by Huong's question. "Okay? What do you mean? I didn't fall." I shook my head, and Huong invited me to sit down. Both of Huong's knees were scraped and swollen, red and inflamed, and her hands were torn open. There were no other injuries. I asked her carefully again, "So why did you fall last night? Did you trip on a stone or something?" Huong sighed, looking at me. "Last night I wanted to tell you, but I was afraid you'd get scared and things would get complicated. Yesterday we were riding along fine, then my bike chain started clanking, and when we reached that asterisk spot, under the bike's small light, I saw a shadowy figure dart out from a nearby tree trunk and thrust its hand directly into my spinning bicycle wheel. It struck so precisely that the bike suddenly stopped, making me fall. Hearing this, every hair on my body stood on end. I stammered, so why didn't Ben see it?" Huong looked at me and replied, "Maybe it didn't want you to see, except for when you helped me up and rode off, it was sitting behind me too. When you asked why I was pedaling so heavily, that's when I felt it sitting behind me, clinging to me." Despite being terrified, Huong still tried to pedal home without letting me know. I nodded, realizing she was right, because if I had known, I probably wouldn't have had the strength to pedal either. I truly admired Huong. She was much braver than me. I thought for a moment, then asked, So when we were almost home, you collapsed from exhaustion, right?" Huong's answer haunted me. "No, it pushed me. When we were almost home, it pushed me hard, making me fall because it knew we had reached my house." I stared blankly, a cold shiver running down my spine, unable to speak. Huong continued, "It seems our house has an ancestral altar, so it couldn't enter. It only dared to push me one last time from outside. I don't know why it harmed me, though." I nodded, feeling a deep fear of that entity. It was always present around us, sometimes without us even knowing. On the way home, my mother said, "I knew it. Something must have happened last night." My mother said Huong's parents had also told her. Neighbors lived close by and often passed that road, so it was important to share these stories to avoid trouble. My mother said many people had encountered ghosts there, so those who were tapping rubber latex wouldn't even finish their work if it got dark because they were so afraid. They had seen many things. My mother heard some of her coworkers say that by that large rock, there used to be an old beggar woman whose house was deep inside the forest. She lived alone and built a small hut on state land. Out of pity, people gave her a plot of land hidden behind the rubber trees to live on. One day, returning from begging at the market, she collapsed and died right there by the rock. It was probably a stroke or an illness of old age. From then on, people would see her spirit wandering there, going from the rock back to her hut, even though the hut had long been demolished. Later, as more houses were built in the area and more people walked by, the old woman's ghost gradually stopped appearing. But sometimes, motorbikes passing by would break down, and two cars carrying firewood or coffee would inevitably drop something. A typical example was the story of little Sarah, the child of Mr. and Mrs. C. Their house was only about 300 meters from that spot. This house was the closest to the main road, so when the parents went to work, the children usually stayed home to watch the house. Back then, it was popular for people to collect rubber seeds to sell for money. A group of friends nearby invited Sarah to join them. The day before, Sarah had refused because her mother had warned her not to leave the house. But her friends urged her, saying they would just go for a while and come back, and her parents wouldn't know. So, the little girl was tempted and went to collect rubber seeds with her friends. The group of 5 or 6 children collected and sorted the ripe seeds. Sarah was collecting when she saw a very large grasshopper in front of her, so she put her bag down to catch it. The grasshopper jumped away, and Sarah chased after it. Sarah pursued it towards the rock, when a friend, still collecting, called out loudly, "Sarah, where are you running off to?" "I'm catching a grasshopper," Sarah replied, then ran around behind the rock but couldn't find the grasshopper. Her friend again called out, "Hurry up and let's go sell them." She crawled around the rock once, then stood up, annoyed. She was about to go back and collect rubber seeds but saw none of her friends. The bag she had been filling was also gone. She thought her friends had gone to sell them on her behalf, so she just shrugged it off and went home, fearing her parents would be back soon. But as she walked home, strangely, she didn't see her house. The house in front of her was now just a large rock, the same rock where she had tried to catch the grasshopper. The little girl walked back the way she came, but still saw only the rock. She looked at the rock one more time, then walked towards where her house should be, but the rock still appeared. "Where is my house?" The little girl panicked and screamed, running back and forth. She ran past the boundaries of other communes, but it was still just that rock. Now she could only bury her face in the rock and sob uncontrollably, because no matter how long she ran, she always returned to the same spot. Little Sarah cried, then ran again down the road to her house, but it was still the rock. This time, she collapsed, crying, then rolled over and fell asleep without knowing when. Her parents returned home at noon to cook but couldn't find her anywhere. They called and called but heard nothing, so they rushed out, asking neighbors to help search. They ran to her friends, who said they had gone to collect rubber seeds and then sold them. They said Sarah had gone to catch a grasshopper and then disappeared. They thought her house was nearby, so she had probably run home early. The children even gave Sarah's parents the money from selling her rubber seeds, but where had she gone? Everyone searched everywhere, even the ponds and streams, but found nothing. Everyone sat, exhausted, at her house, rethinking. It could only be that she was still at the rock, but some people had already searched there and found nothing. Everyone decided to go back to the rock one more time. An elder spoke up. "The child has foolishly run into the place of the unseen. Why hold it against her? Release the little girl back to her parents. Tomorrow her parents will prepare a meal for you. Let the child go." The elder man prayed for a while, then they heard faint sobbing nearby. Everyone rushed over and found little Sarah lying behind the rock, crying. "Oh my God, here she is!" Her parents rushed to embrace her joyfully. My father, who had also joined the search, spoke up. "How strange! I just walked around this area, stepped over and around that rock, and I didn't see her anywhere." The elder man cleared his throat lightly and told her parents to take her home. Back at home, everyone gathered to rub oil and massage little Sarah. After half an hour, she woke up, clinging to her parents and sobbing. No matter what anyone asked, she wouldn't speak until the elderly man spoke up. "Don't be afraid, child. That old woman won't bother you anymore." The little girl then asked, "Really, sir?" The old man nodded, stroked her head, and told her to recount everything. The little girl began to tell her story. It was true that morning she had gone to collect rubber seeds with her friends. But while chasing the grasshopper to the rock, when she tried to run home, she found herself repeatedly walking back to the rock, unable to find her way home. As Sarah cried fiercely, she saw an old woman sitting by the rock. She didn't know how long she had been there. She immediately ran to the old woman and told her she was lost. The old woman smiled at her and said she would lead her back to her parents. The little girl followed the old woman for a long time, walking and walking, until they reached a small leaf hut. The old woman told her to come inside, eat some cake, and then go home. The little girl had a habit of not eating food from strangers, so she refused. The old woman became very angry and said if she didn't eat, she wouldn't lead her home. The little girl reluctantly took a fried cake and ate it. The taste wasn't too bad, so she ate the whole plate. She obediently looked at the old woman, but the old woman then pulled her hand and led her down a very strange road. The old woman leaned on a cane, extending her hand to beg for money from passers-by, and then made Sarah do the same. Sarah reluctantly complied, trying to call out to some passers-by, asking them to lead her home, but they seemed not to hear. After a long time, the old woman led the little girl back to the rock with a basket full of money. Sarah wanted to go home and begged the old woman to let her. But the old woman shouted, "You have to stay here and beg for money for me?" So the little girl cried. The old woman, annoyed by the crying, hit her, making her fall to the ground. The little girl recounted that she could still hear her parents and everyone calling her, but she couldn't answer because the old woman was covering her mouth. She said someone even walked over and stepped on her, but she couldn't utter a sound. It wasn't until she heard the old man say something that the old woman released her and said, "Consider this my agreement to let you go, but you must tell your parents to prepare a meal with chicken and pork tomorrow, or you'll be in trouble with me." At this point, little Sarah could only stare blankly as the old woman flew away and then fainted. When she woke up, she found herself lying in bed, surrounded by her parents and many other people. Seeing the little girl awake and understanding the old woman's wishes, everyone agreed that each household would prepare an offering for the old woman to ask for peace again. The story of the old beggar woman also haunted me deeply. I recounted what I had learned to Huong. We only dared to pass that stretch of road during daylight. Once night fell, we'd rather skip an evening out with friends. Several years later, Huong and I were in our final year of high school. We had to take a bus to school because it was in another district. In the afternoon, I would ride my motorbike to a relative's house, park it there, and wait for the bus. Nothing would have been out of the ordinary if an incident hadn't occurred that almost cost Huong her life. Honestly, after all those years growing up together, I had developed feelings for Huong. From friendship, it had evolved into love. Huong knew about it. Though she hadn't admitted it, I clearly felt she was slowly accepting it. I had confessed my feelings once, but Huong just smiled shyly. Our affection was apparent, but she was still hesitant to acknowledge it. Everything was still fine until one day, the bus taking us to school got a flat tire midway, so we had to walk home. It was still about 1 kilometer to where my motorbike was parked, so Huong and I walked. We passed by the Market Neighborhood Cemetery. This cemetery was located on both sides of the main road, so everyone going to the market had to pass it. Today, Huong, for some reason, looked at a newly buried tombstone and asked me, "Pham Van Hai. Is that Hai from Village 11, Ben?" I was a little surprised but figured Huong knew him, which was why she read his name. I nodded. "Yeah, I think so. Didn't he just die in a speeding accident?" We walked a bit further and Huong said, "It's a pity he died so young." I sighed, not wanting to bring up the deceased, especially in front of their tombstone. Huong and I picked up my motorbike and drove off. On the way, as we were about to turn onto the small dirt road, someone pulled Huong's **ao dai** traditional Vietnamese dress, causing all the buttons to come undone and the fabric to tear up her arm. Huong screamed, startling me, and I stopped the motorbike. Huong immediately told me to quickly turn onto the dirt road so no one would see and think something improper. After turning, I stopped and gave Huong my jacket to wear. Huong quickly put it on, then glanced at me, seeing my wide-eyed stare. She tapped my head and checked her **ao dai**. It wasn't caught in the wheel because she had already tucked up the hem. We speculated for a bit, then quickly went home, making sure Huong's parents wouldn't find out. The next morning, which was Sunday, I went to Huong's house. Both families knew we cared for each other, so they didn't object, just waiting for us to finish our studies and get jobs before organizing a wedding. Huong's parents were already out in the fields early. Huong was awake, but her mother said Huong had a high fever, so I went to buy her a bowl of pho. I knocked and went inside to find Huong still leaning back on her bed, looking exhausted. As I brought the pho over, I was surprised to notice a red mark on Huong's neck. Instantly thinking Huong might be seeing someone else, I felt a surge of heat. When I asked, Huong said she didn't know how the mark got there. She had woken up feeling very tired. I also had proof that she couldn't have been sneaking around with anyone, as Huong and I had been texting until late before going to sleep. All I could do was feed Huong and give her medicine, hoping she would recover. The next morning, I went to pick Huong up for school, but she pulled me into her room and then pulled down the collar of her shirt. I flinched briefly, then was stunned to see another red mark on her left chest, just below her collarbone. "Am I sick, Ben?" Huong asked me, scared. I comforted Huong and told her we would slowly find a solution. By the third day, the red mark was on Huong's stomach, so now there were 3 marks. But this time, Huong recounted that last night, while sleeping, she felt someone pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. After a long while, she returned to normal and saw no one, only a white shadow darting past the window. Having experienced many spiritual phenomena, I knew for sure this was sleep paralysis. I told Huong to tell her parents to invite a shaman to help, but Huong was afraid her parents would worry, so she decided to find a shaman herself. So Huong and her best friend went to a shaman's house to get protective talismans. The shaman gave Huong a few charms, instructing her to place them under her pillow and keep them on her person to prevent evil spirits from bothering her. Huong followed his advice, but this time it was even worse. Huong began to clearly see that the white shadow by the window was a young man. He pressed down on Huong, leaving marks even on intimate areas that Huong didn't tell me about. Huong gradually became much paler, no longer talking happily with me as before. She seemed to be ignoring me. Even though we rode the same bike and went to school together, she wouldn't talk to me, wasn't happy with her friends, and her studies plummeted. I asked many times, but Huong wouldn't answer, even telling me to get lost. I threatened to talk to Huong's parents, but she wouldn't allow it and warned me that she wouldn't tolerate me interfering in her life. During that time, I felt very helpless and sad, not knowing what to do. I told my mother about the situation. My mother was suspicious and believed it was the work of an unseen entity, suggesting we invite a shaman to investigate and help Huong. My mother said she would go talk to Huong's parents because leaving it for too long would not be good. From that day on, Huong no longer rode with me but took the bus to school by herself. And when Huong was at school, my mother went to talk to her parents about their daughter's situation. Huong's parents were also worried, paid more attention to their child, and found my mother's words to be true. The very next day, Huong's parents immediately went to a shaman's house in the district to ask for help. Following a friend's directions, Huong's parents arrived at the shaman's house and called from the yard. The shaman, his clothes soiled from working in the fields, invited Huong's parents in while he went to change. The shaman, about 50 years old, had a benevolent face that inspired trust. He poured tea for the two of them. Squinting his discerning eyes, he looked at Huong's mother, Mrs. Yen, and said, "Your daughter has been very erratic lately, hasn't she?" Mrs. Yen nodded profusely, praising the shaman. The shaman then turned to Mr. Cao, Mrs. Yen's husband, and said, "Your daughter has been possessed for a month already, and you've only just come here. It's fortunate it hasn't taken her away yet. Why the girl is possessed, I'm not entirely sure. I only know this shadow is that of a young man who died prematurely. He's been following your daughter with amorous intentions, planning to take her as his wife once he's strong enough and she consents." Mrs. Yen shook her head. "No way. My daughter would never consent to him. How can a ghost and a human fall in love?" The shaman nodded and continued, "I know, but we still need to confront the spirit to understand fully." The shaman went inside and brought out several talismans for the couple, saying, "Each of you keep one on your person, and take this purple one. As a precaution, if you see your daughter exhibiting strange behavior, possess, just stick this on her forehead and she'll be fine. I will come, but not now." The couple tried their best to watch their daughter. With that, the shaman said he had to go, so the two returned home. Huong's parents returned home to find their daughter missing. It was almost 6 p.m., and Huong should have been home from school. They tried to call her phone, but it was out of service, making Mrs. Yen anxiously tell her husband to go look for their child. So, the couple got on their motorbike and rushed out to search. They drove over 20 kilometers from their house to the school, but still couldn't find their daughter. They came to ask me, and I told them Huong had given me the slip and ran off. In the afternoon, I had stood at her door calling, but Huong didn't answer. I also joined the search but found nothing. Seeing Mrs. Yen collapse in tears, I felt such pity. Not knowing where Huong had gone, Mr. Cow took his wife home, searching as they went. I also went home. Nearing the market in the cemetery area under the faint moonlight, I saw a white shadow standing there. A thought suddenly flashed in my mind, and I sped past Huong's parents, rushing towards it. I clearly saw it was Huong, so I called her parents over. We called Huong's name and approached her. I saw Huong standing in front of Hai's tombstone. She stood there with a bright smile, staring intently at the gravestone. "Oh, Huong, how did it come to this? Come home, my child," Mrs. Yen cried, unable to get close to her daughter. Because as everyone rushed forward, an invisible wall seemed to block them, preventing anyone from approaching Huong. Her parents could only stand and watch, shouting their daughter's name. I tried to push through, but couldn't break the wall. Suddenly, Huong let out a chilling, echoing laugh. In her hand, a small knife appeared from nowhere. She whispered something, but from a distance of 3 or 4 meters, everyone could hear, "Let me die, I'll die to be your wife, Hai." Mrs. Yen and Mr. Cow heard this and were terrified, bowing down and pleading profusely before the tombstone. Mrs. Yen's limbs felt like they were giving out as the first stab cut into Huong's wrist. A stream of fresh red blood flowed out, falling onto the tombstone, then gradually fading as if absorbed into it. I tried every possible way but was still helpless, only able to scream the name of the one I loved. Mr. Cow suddenly remembered, took out the purple talisman the shaman had given him, and held it up to the invisible wall. Crack! Everyone heard the sound of the wall breaking and rushed forward to embrace Huong. Mr. Cow immediately stuck the talisman on her forehead. I snatched the knife away, and together, we took Huong to the hospital. The talisman remained on her forehead until Huong regained consciousness. Fortunately, the wound wasn't deep enough to sever a blood vessel. Huong recuperated for a few days, then returned home, still wearing the talisman on her forehead and resting. When I visited, Huong burst into tears and recounted everything to me. Things were peaceful for a few days until the talisman on Huong's forehead gradually turned black, and then the shaman arrived. He told Huong's parents to remove the talisman and prepare a sleeping place for him near her room. That night, as the shaman slept, he felt a very cold draft. He looked out the kitchen window and saw a white shadow dart past, heading towards the back of the house. He knew it would circle around to Huong's room window. A guttural moan from Huong's throat was clearly heard by the shaman. He moved slowly, then quickly ran to Huong's side, sticking another talisman on her forehead. The white shadow stood there, roaring in anger. It tried to possess Huong but couldn't. The talisman emitted a beam of light, repelling it. Enraged, it lunged at the shaman but was struck back by him. The shadow, realizing it was no match, looked at Huong, then made to leave. But the shaman wouldn't give it a chance. He lunged forward and grabbed it. His hand could actually touch it. Without giving it time to gather itself, the shaman pulled it up, then threw out a carefully folded yellow talisman, trapping its spirit. The shaman returned to his spot and only departed the next morning. Before he left, with my family present and Huong awake, he unfolded the talisman and questioned the spirit that had been haunting Huong. The shaman had given everyone a thick, gooey substance to rub on their eyes so they could see the ghost. His body was covered in wounds, his face disfigured from the accident, and blood was all over him, startling everyone who saw him. But after a moment, he returned to a normal appearance, and everyone recognized him as the young man who had died in an accident not long ago. The shaman used a mulberry branch to whip the spirit repeatedly, causing it to writhe in pain and beg for mercy. The ghost recounted that because Huong had passed by and read his name aloud before his grave, and even mentioned he died young, he heard her and followed her. He intended to drag Huong down to be with him, but then felt pity for her parents, so he hadn't actually harmed her yet. He just needed to gather enough strength to harm Huong and take her with him. He said he also had feelings for Huong. Huong fearfully hid behind her mother, while I spoke up. "I don't like you. I've already chosen the man I will marry. Go away." The ghost heard this and turned to look at me, his eyes blazing with streaks of red blood. Although terrified, I still forced myself to say, "Huong has me. You're dead. Go back to where you belong." The shaman also stated that the young man was deceased and could not follow the living. The shaman said he would help him find peace. Although he had caused distress to Huong, he had known when to stop, so the shaman would forgive him. He looked at Huong, and 2 streams of dark red tears flowed down his face. Then, he flew into the shaman's talisman. The shaman instructed everyone to wipe their eyelids, and they would no longer see anything. He also made Huong a red string necklace, telling her that wearing it would ward off evil spirits. Huong still wears that necklace to this day. After that day, Huong returned to normal. We diligently studied for our final exams and then went to university. Our love for each other remained unchanged. Once we both had jobs, our parents urged us to marry soon, so a beautiful and fulfilling wedding was successfully held. We moved to the city to live due to our work. Amidst this bustling city, we no longer encountered those spiritual phenomena. Huong gradually forgot those days until the young man reappeared in her dream recently. He congratulated her and wished her happiness, then shed 2 streams of dark red tears before vanishing. We contacted the shaman again to ask about it. The shaman said it was time for him to forget the mortal realm and find peace, which was why he appeared to Huong one last time. They are always around us, sometimes without our knowing. They are invisible, but if we don't disturb them, they won't harm us. Because there are good ghosts and bad ghosts, don't generalize.